We were told the $37 trillion was a burden. This was the greatest lie of all. The $37 trillion was never a burden. It was a weapon. It was a 50-year financial illusion, a magic trick designed to misdirect the entire world. While we, the citizens, were panicked, staring at the flashing red numbers of the debt, we failed to watch the machine as it was quietly executing the greatest financial escape plan in human history. This is not a theory. This is not speculation. This is what happened. This is the story of the Great Deception. This is how America used the people's magic, cryptocurrency, and the king's relic, gold, to execute a global rug pull, vaporize $37 trillion of liabilities, and begin the new empire. To understand the escape plan, you must first understand the architecture of the trap. The trap was the US dollar itself. After 1971, when America severed the dollar from gold, the machine was born. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, a ghost backed by nothing but a promise. This was called the exorbitant privilege. America, and only America, could print the money it needed to fund its wars, its deficits, and its consumption. But this privilege was, in reality, an exorbitant prison. The machine created a paradox. To keep the global economy from collapsing, America had to run massive deficits it had to print. And the world, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, had no choice but to take those printed dollars and recycle them back into the only asset deep and liquid enough to hold them: US Treasury bonds. They were funding their own master. This was the trap. The $37 trillion debt was the shackle that bound the world to the American machine. But by 2024, the machine was breaking. It was sputtering. The cost of this empire, the endless wars, the pandemic bailouts, the servicing of the $10 trillion AI bubble was becoming too great. The interest payments on the debt alone were eclipsing the entire military budget. The world was beginning to question. The de-dollarization whispers were becoming a roar. The high priest at the Federal Reserve had a choice. They could do what 1929 demanded, allow the market to collapse, purge the system, and suffer a deflationary depression that would wipe out the titans. Or they could do what 1933, 2008, and 2020 taught them. Print. They chose to print. They chose to provide liquidity for the AI bubble, for the failing banks, for the next crisis. They chose to sacrifice the currency to save the market. They chose hyperinflation. And in doing so, they triggered the final phase of the plan. They knew that printing the dollar into worthlessness would vaporize the $37 trillion debt. It would wipe the slate clean. But a king cannot vaporize his own wealth. If you are going to burn your own house down, you must first secretly move your valuables to a fireproof vault. And that vault was not the dollar. How do we know this was the plan? Because they told us. It is the dark blueprint our system uses time and time again. We must go back to 1933. The country was in the grip of the Great Depression. The machine was broken. President Franklin D. Roosevelt entered the room. He did not ask, he commanded. With Executive Order 6102, FDR made it a crime for any American citizen to own gold. You were told to turn in your coins, your bullion, your certificates to the Federal Reserve. This was not a request. It was a seizure. The American people, terrified, obeyed. They traded their real money, their gold, for paper dollars at a fixed price of $20.67 per ounce. And then, the moment the vaults were full, FDR pulled the lever. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934. In one night, the government repriced the very gold it had just seized. The new price was $35 an ounce. It was not a repricing, it was a confession. In one move, the government had devalued the paper dollar by 41%. It had stolen 41% of the savings of every person who held a dollar. It vaporized its domestic debts, and the government's own balance sheet, now full of gold, magically profited by nearly $3 billion. This was the blueprint. Publicly discredit the real asset, gold. Force the public to trade their real asset for a paper asset, the dollar. Once the vaults are full, destroy the paper asset. The government holding the real asset is the sole survivor. This is the 1933 blueprint, and it is the exact blueprint they used for the Great Deception. To execute the 1933 plan in the 21st century, the machine first needed a distraction. It needed a circus. A grand casino so loud, so bright, and so intoxicating that no one would look at their hands while they performed the trick. That circus was the AI bubble. The AI bubble of 2023 to 2025 was the new god of technology, the new RCA from 1929. The narrative was perfect. Productivity is dead, but AI is here to save us. This illusion served two vital purposes. First, it created a story to justify the last, final, euphoric surge of the fiat-fueled stock market. Second, and more importantly, it created a designated casino. It gave the public, the 401ks, the pension funds, a safe place to put their paper money. While every retail trader and every retirement fund in America was being forced to pour their money into this top-heavy, six-stock monolith. Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, the real money, the smart money, the state money, was quietly moving its chips off the table. They needed you to be addicted to the AI stock market. They needed you staring at Nvidia so you wouldn't see what they were doing in the vaults. The new 1933 playbook began with the asset they feared most: cryptocurrency. Bitcoin was the people's gold. It was decentralized, digital, and provably scarce. It was the first real threat to the state's monopoly on money in a century. How do you seize an asset that's just a 12-word password? You don't seize it. You scare the public into selling it. Phase 1. Demonize the asset. For years, the Treasury, the Fed, and the SEC waged a coordinated war of words. The Treasury Secretary called it a tool for terrorists. The bankers called it rat poison. The SEC Chairman, Gary Gensler, launched a brutal campaign of regulation by enforcement. This was not a failure of regulation. It was a strategy. The goal was not to protect investors. The goal was to terrify investors. It was to ensure that you, the citizen, would never dream of putting your retirement savings into this dangerous, criminal, unregulated asset. You were protected from the lifeboat. Phase 2. Secretly accumulate the asset. While the headlines screamed, "Crypto is dead," the US government was quietly becoming the largest Bitcoin whale on Earth. They used the Department of Justice as their corporate raider. They didn't just confiscate Bitcoin, they swept it. The Silk Road seizure, the Bitfinex hack recovery, the Mt. Gox settlement, the Binance fine. Well, this wasn't just justice, it was acquisition. They demonized the asset in public, creating panic and suppressing the price, while they seized, confiscated, and accumulated it in the shadows. They were filling their digital vaults. They were running the 1933 playbook perfectly. The machine is pragmatic. It does not bet on just one horse. It secured the old money as well. Gold. Phase 1. Demonize the asset. The narrative on Wall Street for a decade was simple. Gold is a pet rock. It's a relic. It pays no dividend. The financial media, owned by the same titans who needed you to stay in the AI stock market, pushed this story relentlessly. Gold was dead money. The real action was in Nvidia. Phase 2. Secretly accumulate the asset. While the public was told gold was a barbarous relic, what were the smartest institutions in the world doing? They were buying. The central banks of the world, led by China, Russia, and India, began buying physical gold at a pace never before seen in modern history. The media reported this as de-dollarization, as an act of war against the US. This was the second great misdirection. Yes, China was buying, but the real story was happening in the unseen markets. At the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS in Switzerland, the central bank of central banks. In the shadows, the US Treasury was engaged in the largest asset swap in history. It was quietly trading its $37 trillion in paper, Treasury bonds, to desperate foreign nations. And in exchange, it was repatriating and accumulating physical gold. They were trading their worthless printed paper promises for the world's real money. By early 2025, the trap was set. The public was 100% invested in the fiat system. Paper dollars, 401ks, and the AI stock bubble. The state had quietly cornered the world's two real unprintable assets, gold, and Bitcoin. The vaults were full. It was time to pull the rug. All the machine needed was the excuse. It came, as it always does, as a crisis. The AI bubble, having served its purpose as a distraction, was the designated scapegoat. It began with an earnings report. A titan, Microsoft or Google, finally had to confess. The confession? The AI revolution was a cost, not a profit. They had spent hundreds of billions on Nvidia chips, but the AI-powered applications were not generating new revenue. The cash flow was the lie. The 100 times PE ratios evaporated. The stock market, now 90% Magnificent 6, imploded. The zero DTE options, the digital gasoline, turned a 5% dip into a 50% vaporization of wealth in a single day. The great crash of 2026 was here, and the American people, their 401ks annihilated, turned to their high priest. They turned to the Fed, do something. This time the Fed did not tighten like in 1929. They did not provide liquidity like in 2008. They initiated the final print. It was not a bailout. It was a monetary supernova. The Fed announced it would buy everything. Every bad bond, every failing bank, every worthless AI stock. They printed not trillions, but quadrillions of new digital fiat dollars. They saved the market by executing the currency. In 3 months, the price of a loaf of bread was $500. A gallon of gas was $1,000. Hyperinflation had arrived. And the $37 trillion national debt? It was still there. But it was now a joke. You could pay the entire $37 trillion sum with the same amount of money it cost to buy a new car, China's $1 trillion bet on America? Vaporized. Japan's $1 trillion savings? Vaporized. Your life savings? Your safe pension fund? Your paper dollars in the bank? Wiped out. The great transfer of wealth was complete. The citizen was bankrupt. 1 month later, the president addresses the nation. The tone is not panic. It is resolve. My fellow Americans, he says, the fiat dollar, an experiment of the last 50 years, has failed, but America has not. We are a nation of assets, a nation of strength, and today we will reset the global standard. The great deception is complete. The controlled demolition is over. The next day, the new dollar is unveiled. A new, pristine, sovereign, digital dollar, CBDC. And what backs it? Not a promise, not faith. It is backed by the largest state-owned, consolidated, and seized reserves of gold and Bitcoin in human history. The $37 trillion liability is erased. America's national balance sheet is the most powerful on Earth, backed by real assets. But your balance sheet, your paper, your 401k, your fiat savings, is gone. You have been reset to zero. You have been forced to trade your worthless old dollars for the new digital dollar at a rate of perhaps 10,000 to 1. You were told for 50 years to fear the debt. You were told for 10 years to fear Bitcoin. You were told for 50 years to ignore gold. It was all a lie. It was a 50-year magic trick. The debt was never the problem. It was the distraction. They didn't just move the goalposts, they reset the entire game. And in the process, they didn't just seize your gold like in 1933. They made you watch as they vaporized the value of everything else you owned.